A spout on the horizon! Hey! A big one! Hold fast! Whoa! The deck's alive! Hey! To the rails, lad!
It's the keel shuddering!
We survived this. Hold fast.
Lord, deliver my crew from this peril.
What if I told you that America's greatest maritime myth is based not on fiction, but on terrifying reality? Hidden in the depths of the ocean are stories that are not only breathtaking, but also present man with the most unbearable moral dilemmas. This is the story of the whaling ship Essex, which set out to hunt but found not prey, but its executioner, a giant sperm whale that deliberately attacked and sank the ship. The crew who survived the monstrous attack drifted for months in flimsy boats in the boundless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Their adventure turned into an epic but terrifying saga of survival, which Herman Melville would later turn into the immortal novel Moby-Dick. Watch the video to the end to find out how just 8 men managed to return home alive and what choice on the verge of human endurance they had to make to save their lives. I discovered it by accident on the quiet, dark night of November 20th, 1820, which in an instant turned into a fiery and watery hell. In the pitch darkness of the Pacific Ocean, 3,000 kilometers from the nearest land, the whaling ship Essex slowly rocked on the waves as its crew prepared for dinner. No one could have foreseen that in the next moment, their familiar world would be split in two by a monstrous, deliberate blow. An unexpected jolt shook the 238-ton ship to its keel, the sound of breaking wood rang out, and the crew realized that this was no ordinary storm. Young first mate Owen Chase, who was on board, was the first to see the cause of the disaster. A huge, completely white sperm whale with a head of unimaginable size. The whaling ship, built in 1799, was like a toy to the giant mammal, which was 26 meters long. While the shocked crew tried to figure out what had happened, the animal, as if aware of its goal, turned around and, gaining incredible speed, crashed into the bow of the ship again. This was not a random blow, but a calculated, two-pronged attack that tore off the plating and caused water to pour into the hull of the ship with tremendous force. Within minutes, it became clear that the Essex was doomed, and the only hope left was 3 small whaling boats. On the water, which was quickly becoming covered with oil and debris, the sailors frantically lowered the boats, managing to take only the bare essentials. In a matter of minutes, as the Essex sank, the crew of 20 found themselves in the ocean, without charts or reliable supplies. Captain George Pollard Jr. and his men watched as their home and their work, their only anchor in this world, disappeared into the waves. Their journey had only just begun, but it had already turned into a flight from death. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how the instinct for self-preservation forces people to make instant, incredible decisions in the face of disaster? Write about it in the comments. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other stories about survival. Want to know the main secret to the prosperity of American whalers? To understand the full tragedy of the Essex, we need to go back to 1819, to the thriving port city of Nantucket, the world capital of whaling. For the residents of this island off the coast of Massachusetts, whaling was not just a job, but a way of life that brought enormous wealth. The young 28-year-old Captain Pollard Jr., who came from a distinguished whaling family, was leading the Essex on its 7th voyage. The crew was young, full of energy, and eager to make money. Their main goal was simple and clear: to return home with their holds filled with whale oil, which was the main source of lighting and lubrication in the 19th century. The Essex was a small but sturdy ship, built for long voyages to the remote waters of the Pacific Ocean. Their route took them across the Atlantic, around Cape Horn, the most dangerous sea passage on the planet, and on to little explored areas where whales were said to be particularly numerous and fat. It was the most prestigious and dangerous job in the world. The crew consisted mainly of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard men, for whom whaling was the only means of livelihood. Among them were the experienced first mate Owen Chase and the young 15-year-old cabin boy Thomas Nickerson. who would later leave us his invaluable diary. They were all bound together by strong community ties and a belief in their success. Their voyage did not promise a quick catch. Pollard and Chase knew that they would have to spend 2.5 years at sea to fulfill their plan to harvest whale blubber. However, greed and ambition drove them further and further into the most unexplored corners of the ocean. Their mission was no secret, but it contained an unspoken order to go beyond traditional hunting grounds. Whales in the Atlantic and off the coast of South America were becoming increasingly rare, and whalers were forced to go west, to waters where few had gone before them. On this journey, the most unpredictable encounters awaited them. Their path was determined by economic necessity and the desire to bring home the most valuable treasure of the era, spermaceti oil, which burned brightly and was almost odorless. It was an era when whaling was the engine of the global economy, and the lighting of entire cities depended on these sailors. From the moment they left port on August 12, 1819, they moved toward their goal, unaware that their fate was already sealed. This voyage was supposed to be a triumph, but it turned into a dark prophecy. Their goal was not just hunting, but domination of the ocean, the belief that man could subjugate any element and any animal. This self-confidence led them into the depths of the Pacific Ocean. But knowledge of the terrain was only half the battle. Ready to learn how the crew of the Essex encountered a series of almost mystical warnings that they chose to ignore? And you've definitely never heard about this unique secret. Early in the voyage, on August 29, 1819, the Essex was struck by its first misfortune. A sudden squall hit the ship and tore off the main staysail, a crucial piece of rigging. This breakdown, which happened just 2 weeks after leaving port, was a bad sign. After repairs that took several days, on September 26, 1819, the ship rounded Cape Horn. But an equally strange incident awaited them in the South Atlantic. First mate Owen Chase nearly died when a huge wave washed him overboard. Only the incredible skill of the sailors allowed him to be rescued. These incidents did not deter the crew from their goal, but they sowed the first seeds of unease. As they advanced westward into uncharted waters, where no whalers had ever set foot, the crew began to encounter a frightening emptiness. There were no whales, and the search for prey dragged on. The crew's morale began to decline, and conflicts between Captain Pollard and First Mate Chase intensified. Pollard, young and inexperienced, was inclined to take risks, while Chase, more pragmatic, insisted on returning to safer waters. On June 21, 1820, the third and most frightening omen awaited them. While anchored off the Galapagos Islands to replenish supplies and repair the boats, one of the crew members, Thomas Nickerson, accidentally started a fire. The fire engulfed part of the deck and living quarters, destroying a significant portion of the provisions. Although the fire was quickly extinguished, it destroyed the drinking water supplies and important whaling equipment. This was a direct result of a breach of discipline, but the crew, desperate for a catch, saw it as a temporary inconvenience rather than a sign of fate. Despite all these setbacks, on October 25, 1820, they finally reached a new, untouched whaling ground. In less than a month, they managed to harvest nearly 100 barrels of whale blubber, which breathed new life into the weary crew. Success silenced all doubts and fears. November 19, 1820, was a normal day. The crew was preparing for dinner, and there were already about 800 barrels of blubber on board. Only about 200 barrels remained to fill the hold. Success was so close that nothing could distract them from their goal. The next day, November 20, 1820, disaster struck. Their ship was at 0 Washore, circa 40 Marses, 119 circa Larn, in the deepest isolation imaginable. Everything that had happened before, the fire, the storm, the conflicts, turned out to be just a prelude. Thus, the chain of misfortunes and disregard for warnings, from the very beginning of the voyage to the fateful change of course, created the perfect conditions for tragedy. This story shows how human greed and overconfidence can lead to disaster. Like this video if you think the crew should have heeded these omens. What you are about to learn will change your perception of marine predators. The disaster occurred at noon on November 20th, 1820. The ship was attacked not just by a large animal, but by a sperm whale, which, according to eyewitness accounts, acted with extraordinary calculation and fury. It was not a collision, but a deliberate ramming, which became the most horrific event in the history of whaling. At the moment of the first attack, when 2 boats were lowered for hunting, only 10 people remained on board. First Mate Owen Chase was at the stern and was the first to see the huge mammal, about 26 meters long, smash through the bow of the ship. In his diary, Chase wrote that the whale appeared white and angry, with an unusually broad head. The impact was so powerful that the oak hull cracked. The whale, seemingly realizing that it had not achieved its goal, swam away for a short distance. Chase immediately ordered the crew to begin repairs and take down the sails to avoid further movement until the extent of the damage could be assessed. However, less than 10 minutes later, the whale returned. It appeared on the surface and circled the ship, as if assessing the situation. Then, gathering incredible speed, it attacked again, striking from the other side, which completely destroyed the ship's hull. This second blow was fatal. Water poured into the hull, and it became clear that the Essex could not be saved. The ship was sinking rapidly, and the crew panicked as they tried to salvage at least some of their supplies and equipment. Owen Chase, showing incredible composure, directed the rescue. They managed to launch 3 boats, their last hope. Some navigational instruments were saved, as well as a small amount of biscuits and a little water. By the time the Essex sank, Pollard and Chase's crew found themselves in 3 flimsy boats, thousands of kilometers from land, with provisions that would only last a few days. It was one of the most terrible dilemmas in the history of seafaring. Captain Pollard and Chase joined forces and made an absurd decision: not to sail to the nearest inhabited islands of Polynesia, fearing cannibalism. Based on rumors, they decided it would be better to drift south and east toward distant South America, which meant a journey of more than 4,000 kilometers. They chose hunger and thirst in the open ocean, believing it to be a lesser evil than the potential threat from the islanders. This desperate and fear-based decision proved fatal, condemning them to months of unbearable suffering. In the next chapter, you will learn how the Apaches turned stones and dust into their main weapon of invisibility. What if I told you that one of the tools of warfare was water? After the Essex sank, the 20 surviving sailors divided themselves into 3 boats. Captain Pollard commanded one, Owen Chase commanded another, and second mate Matthew Joy commanded the third. At first, they stuck to one direction, moving east toward South America. Their journey was one of incredible hardship and a slow, exhausting struggle. The early days of the drift were filled with fear, but also with hope. Food supplies, biscuits, were very limited and strictly rationed. Each boat received about 120 grams of food per person per day. Water became the biggest problem. The fresh water that had been saved was only enough for a few weeks. On the 3rd day of their drift, far from the site of the wreck, Chase's crew was able to obtain some provisions. They caught and ate several birds that landed on their boat. It was a small but critically important source of protein that allowed them to hold out longer. Gradually, under the scorching sun and in conditions of constant thirst, the crew began to weaken. With each passing day, the men became more and more exhausted. The seawater they tried to quench their thirst with only accelerated their dehydration. A month later, on December 20th, 1820, they suffered their first loss. In Matthew Joy's boat, the first sailor died of thirst and exhaustion. This event marked the beginning of a grim series of losses that would haunt them until the end of their journey. A few weeks later, at the end of December, the 3 boats came across the uninhabited Henderson Island in the Pitcairn Archipelago. Here they were able to replenish their fresh water supplies and find some edible plants. However, there were very few provisions on the island. 3 men, Thomas Chappell, Seth Kills, and William Wright, decided to stay on the island, believing it was their only chance. The remaining 17 people, considering the island too barren for survival, set out again into the ocean, continuing their mad drift towards South America. It was an incredibly difficult but conscious parting. The remnants of the crew divided themselves into 3 boats again and moved on. Soon, Matthew Joy's boat disappeared without a trace, leaving only 2 groups alive, Captain Pollard and First Mate Chase. At this time, the most terrible events began in the boats, caused by a complete lack of food. They were forced to resort to extreme measures to survive. When one of their companions died, his body became the only source of food for the rest. Ready to learn about the thing that saved millions of lives? By early January 1821, only 12 people remained in Pollard and Chase's boats. Hunger and water shortages reached their limit, and people began to die rapidly. The drift turned into a nightmare. Chase's boat, with 4 men remaining, was found first on February 18, 1821 by the whaler Indian. Only Owen Chase, Richard Peterson, Benjamin Lawrence, and Thomas Nickerson were still alive. All of them were on the verge of life and death, their bodies exhausted and emaciated. Captain Pollard's boat was found 5 days later, on February 23, 1821, by the whaling ship Dauphin. Only 2 members of his crew survived, George Pollard Jr. himself and Charles Ramsdell. They were rescued in a condition that doctors described as extreme exhaustion. When Pollard and Ramsdell were found, they were completely out of their minds, driven mad by hunger and deprivation. Their rescue was a shocking testimony to what a person is willing to do to survive. The fate of the other crew members was tragic. Matthew Joy's lifeboat, which had gone missing, was never found. It is believed that all 6 people on board perished in the ocean. The sailors rescued on Henderson Island were found and rescued on April 19, 1821, 101 days after parting with their comrades. They were discovered by the whaling ship Surrey. All 3, Chappell, Kills, and Wright, were alive. Thus, of the 20 people who left the Essex in boats, only 8 survived. Each of them returned with terrible experiences and psychological trauma. Survival came at an incredible, inhuman price. This episode became one of the darkest and most discussed in the history of seafaring, raising questions about the limits of human will and ethics. How many people today do you think would be able to make a candle with their own hands? The story of the Essex instantly became an urban legend in Nantucket and beyond. The survivors who returned home in 1821 were greeted as heroes, but they bore not only physical scars, but also deep psychological ones. The first person to decide to record this story was First Mate Owen Chase. In 1821, he published his diary, Narrative of the Most Extraordinary and Disastrous Voyage of the Whaleship Essex. The book became a sensation, describing the horror, hunger, and extreme measures the crew had to resort to. Chase's diary was written in simple but expressive language and became one of the most popular maritime reports of the time. He described in detail the whale attack, the slow sinking of the ship, and the horrors of the subsequent drift, without hiding the morally difficult details. The second important source was the diary of Thomas Nickerson, a ship's boy. He was too young to write about his experiences immediately after his rescue. 40 years after the tragedy, he wrote his memoirs, which were only published in 1984, and added new, equally dramatic details to the story of the Essex. Chase's and Nickerson's books became the cornerstone for the creation of the greatest American novel. Young sailor Herman Melville read Chase's report in 1841 and was deeply shaken by it. In 1851, he published Moby-Dick, which was directly inspired by the story of the Essex. The tragedy of the Essex dealt a serious blow to the belief in the invincibility of whaling. It showed for the first time that a whale could be not just prey, but an intelligent opponent capable of a targeted attack. The story of the whale's attack on the Essex sparked widespread debate in the scientific community of the time. Until then, it was believed that whales, although powerful animals, were not capable of deliberate aggression against ships. Owen Chase's report was the first to present the sperm whale as a ferocious and intelligent enemy. Later in the 19th century, several more similar incidents were recorded, confirming that whales did sometimes ram whaling ships. This phenomenon was called whale revenge. Modern marine biologists explain the attack as an act of self-defense. Sperm whales, especially females, can become aggressive when protecting their offspring. But a deliberate ramming of a ship, as happened with the Essex, remains a unique case. This was, in fact, the only recorded instance of a ship being destroyed by a giant sperm whale. In popular mythology and culture, the Essex and Moby-Dick have become symbols of the untamed power of nature and the futility of man's attempts to completely conquer it. The story of an animal's revenge has become a universal parable about the limits of what is permissible. The site of the Essex's sinking remains one of the most remote and inaccessible areas of the Pacific Ocean. It is located in the so-called equatorial zone with strong currents, which made the drift particularly difficult. Henderson Island, where 3 crew members landed, remains uninhabited today. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site due to its unique ecosystem, which, as it turned out, was unable to feed 3 people for a long time. The influence of the Essex story can also be seen in modern ocean research. It forced people to rethink their attitude towards marine mammals and served as one of the implicit impetus for environmental awareness. There are 2 key moments in the story of the Essex where the most counterintuitive decisions were made, which determined the final outcome. The first was Pollard and Chase's decision not to sail to the islands of Polynesia, and the second was the terrible choice they had to make in order to hold out until rescue. The decision to avoid the Polynesian islands based on fear of cannibalism led the crew to consciously choose to drift thousands of kilometers across the open ocean. Subsequent research revealed that the nearest islands, the Society and Tuamotu Islands, were inhabited, but stories of cannibalism were most likely greatly exaggerated. If they had chosen to sail west, they would have reached the islands much faster and with a greater chance of survival. This decision, dictated by fear of the unknown, was a major navigational error. The second and most grim decision is one that has not been written about in books for the general public. When hunger became unbearable, the surviving sailors were forced to resort to drawing lots. They agreed that one of them must sacrifice himself so that the others could survive. This terrible choice was documented in the reports of those who were rescued. The lot fell to Owen Coffin, Captain Pollard's cousin. Charles Ramsdell was chosen to carry out the act. It was an act of desperation, a collective decision made to prevent mutiny and chaos. Captain Pollard, although opposed to it, was unable to prevent the tragedy. He remained with Ramsdell in the lifeboat until they were rescued and witnessed all the horror. The moral burden of this choice haunted him for the rest of his life. After their rescue and return to Nantucket, Pollard and Ramsdell were not prosecuted. At that time, maritime law recognized that in extreme circumstances, when human life was at stake, exceptional measures could be taken. Public opinion, although shocked, was sympathetic to their plight. The rescued members of the Essex crew lived different lives, but none of them were able to completely escape the shadows of that tragedy. Their story is not only one of survival, but also of the inevitable, devastating consequences. Captain George Pollard Jr. never recovered from the experience. After the second shipwreck, he gave up sailing and spent the rest of his life in Nantucket, where he lived to the age of 81. He was often visited by tourists and curious people, to whom he told his story. Owen Chase, the first mate, returned to whaling and became a captain. However, his life was full of anxiety and nightmares. In his old age, he suffered from nightmares and, according to reports, kept food with him, fearing he would go hungry again. He died at the age of 63. Thomas Nickerson, the youngest member of the crew, tried to make sense of the trauma in his memoirs, but never succeeded in his lifetime. His story was full of childish naivety and horror at what was happening. The 3 men who remained on Henderson Island, Chappell, Kills, and Wright, were rescued and also returned to Nantucket. Their decision, which at first seemed cowardly, turned out to be the only correct one, allowing them to preserve both their lives and their humanity. Thus, the Essex became more than just a ship sunk by a whale. It became a symbol of an era when man considered himself the master of nature but was severely punished for his pride. The resilience of the survivors is an incredible achievement of the human spirit, but it came at a price that cannot be measured in any currency. Their fate shows that in the struggle for life, man is capable of incredible things, but this victory always leaves scars that never heal. They defeated the ocean and hunger, but lost their innocence and peaceful past. Their story is a grim reminder that nature always has the final say in any drama. Which of these moral dilemmas seems most unsolvable to you? Was it the choice of course or the lottery? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new research on the history of survival. We conclude our immersion in one of the most terrifying and significant maritime stories. The Essex is not just a shipwreck, it is a historical precedent that changed not only the lives of the 8 survivors, but also world literature, giving rise to Moby-Dick. This story is a bitter lesson about human vulnerability, the price of ambition, and the unbearable moral boundaries that are erased when it comes to survival. The testimonies of Owen Chase and Thomas Nickerson will forever remain in history as documents of inhuman fortitude. Which stage of this expedition did you find most tragic? Was it the whale attack itself, or the months of drifting, filled with hunger and despair? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see on our channel in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.